Hey everyone, Ryan Liz with Telus News here with my friend Miles Taylor. Miles, this is like your 10th live session of the day or something, right?
Yeah, and you get like a special badge after that from your wife. She comes up,
For
she
your
comes
wife, not for
upstairs and says, "Yeah," she says, "What the hell are you doing?" Yes,
yeah.
that's how it goes.
I do love the glimpses into domestic life that we all get from Substack Lives. I
Oh,
uh
it's
I,
great. I
I
do have
did
to tell you, I was on with our friend Don Lemon the other day, and we were talking about the takeover in DC and the National Guard, and I was by that place, where the Busboys and Poets is, the one closest to downtown, and I got swarmed by like 300 or 400 mosquitoes. You couldn't see it on the video, but they were attacking my hands and my ankles in a way I've never been swarmed by mosquitoes. And so thanks for Substack Live. I just picked up the phone and we took a little tour of the neighborhood instead of me sitting there getting eaten alive.
you just move, yeah.
Yeah, we just
Um
moved.
I had Paul Krugman on this week, and his wife didn't know that he was doing a Substack Live, and it was a very funny moment where she came in and sort of was like, uh, asking him some questions about about the schedule. It was
What
very,
did
very
we
funny.
learn about Paul's schedule?
Well, I think we learned who the boss is at home.
Yeah, exactly.
um, I'm only half kidding. Well, let's let the crowd build a little bit, and then
Yeah.
I actually just want to, before we get into some of the substance, and you continue to be your experience in the first Trump administration at DHS continues to be incredibly important, just because DHS is the sort of locus of so much of what's going on, and your knowledge of that is so important. So I know you haven't run out of things to say about uh, the situation with ICE and the National Guard. So I want to talk about all of that. But I also just want to briefly talk about something we've talked a little bit about offline, which is independent media and sort of how, maybe just a couple of minutes, how you've, this transition you've made and how you're enjoying it, how you see yourself sort of going forward.
All great things. Well, one thing on DHS that I just want to say for a second
Yeah.
is um not the most glamorous department of all the departments. If you come up as a foreign policy and national security gal or guy in Washington, most of them don't start off saying I want to work at DHS. And so there was this
Didn't
interest.
exist for some people who were
Well,
when they started
didn't
out.
didn't exist, and and then after 9/11, when the department was created, there were some folks, who wanted to veer off from going to DoD and the State Department and the CIA to go do DHS work, but still was kind of, seen as a backwater. I bring that up because during the first Trump administration, his national security cabinet really didn't think about national security through the lens of Homeland Security. But there was a problem with that because Donald Trump did. And he thought about everything through the lens of Homeland Security. And people found that out the hard way. When he was thinking about the defense of the United States, he wasn't really thinking about DOD. He was thinking, how do I get those soldiers somehow from DOD into DHS to
Mm.
prioritize all the missions that I want DHS to take on? And it took years for that to play out from behind the scenes into the foreground during the first Trump administration. Now I think you're seeing it very, very obviously. And it's not just about immigration. I think what folks are coming to recognize this week is it's about presidential power. I mean, Trump's repeated comments this week about I'm a dictator, I'm not a dictator, and winking about the idea of being a dictator are indicative of his desire to use his domestic powers and domestic agencies like the Department of Homeland Security to expand his influence. And so I give you all of that context to say we are only just seeing the beginning of how he's going to try to leverage that department and the supercharging of ICE into the nation's largest law enforcement agency is going to be one of those things. And I'm telling you, it's not just going to be about immigration because ICE, of course, has within it an organization called HSI, Homeland Security Investigations. a huge investigative organization very similar to the FBI. And
Yep.
while a lot of their legal authorities have hooks into things related to immigration and trade and things that cross borders, those investigators can use that, and they do, for everything from investigating crypto schemes to online fraud to threats to child endangerment, a whole vast array of things. But Donald Trump wants to turn that investigative agency into what he's already starting to do with the FBI. And so I'm putting that out there because there's so much more that can happen at the department that we haven't seen yet. And we're in those early innings right now.
All right, let's just stick with this because I think there's so much to unpack with what you just said, and it sort of points to a kind of sort of more general theory about what Trump is doing and about his administration's view of presidential power and how they see internal threats as the main thing that they need to defend against rather than external threats. And um, there's nothing wrong with Homeland Security was meant to respond to certain internal threats, but I think where things get pretty scary with Trump is he sees internal threats with immigrants, legal or not, and then it extends, of course, to political opponents, and then, of course, just to anyone who disagrees with him. This is me obviously saying all this, not you, Miles, but just unpack a little bit about his Trump's what you witnessed in the first Trump administration in terms of how he sees the defense of the United States through not the State Department or the Pentagon, but through DHS. What is the issue? What are the issues that DHS deals with that kind of make that the tip of the spear for him?
Well, I think to put it really, really simply, for him, if he's going to consolidate his power in the United States, the most effective means he has to do that directly under his control is through the Department of Homeland Security, third largest department in the federal government. Of course, DOD is the largest. Second largest is the Department of Veterans Affairs, but that's largely because of funding, payments on veterans. It's not like he's going to take VA hospitals and take over the country through VA hospitals. And he knows that there are limitations in how he can use the Pentagon here at home. He was reminded of that so many times in the first term when he learned about Posse Comitatus and when he learned about the Insurrection Act. Um, and so, DHS stands out as, in a sense, kind of the easy button for Donald Trump to go exert his will. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Think about Illinois right now. The president has said not nice things about Governor Pritzker. And his way of creating leverage over a state like Illinois through DHS is not limited to immigration. Yes, he can surge officers into that state to go arrest migrants. He can do crackdowns in Chicago. But Illinois depends on that department for all sorts of things: cybersecurity protections, emergency response in disasters, the protection of soft targets and crowded places against mass shooters. DHS offers support for things like preventing school shootings and increasing school safety, the protection of federal buildings through the Federal Protective Service, and on down the list. There's this vast array of ways that Donald Trump could now look at DHS and say, oh, you are like one of my best tools to go piss off that governor and create leverage over him. Say you're going to deny services. Say you're going to throttle the number of TSA agents in O'Hare. Say you're going to end up sending those ICE agents onto Chicago streets to police other federal crimes. There's a lot that you can do there, and they're only scratching the surface. And the biggest one this week, Ryan, that was concerning to me is we saw that very quietly the Trump administration named a senior official to oversee election integrity for the federal government. This is a new official whose job has been created within DHS. And a lot of people who know those offices very well, a lot of us were chatting on signal chains and saying, this could go very, very bad. First of all, this is a position that doesn't exist in the law, doesn't really have a budget or office. And so normally you would say, well, it's just a person in a suit who's going to show up. Except in this case, it's a known conspiracy theorist from Pennsylvania who fanned the flames of stolen election conspiracies in 2020 and 2024, who's now notionally in charge of election security across the United States from DHS. And there are a lot of ways the administration, if it wanted to, could start to shape the battlefield for 2026 in a way that favors the president, and all by using tools and offices within that department. So, yet
All right, let's
another
go through
area.
that.
Go ahead.
Let's unpack that, Miles, because this is I think this will be new to a lot of people. And there was this unusual executive order that Trump signed earlier this year that had a lot of people concerned because it suggested that he wanted to federalize our elections, which of course are run at the local level. So give us and just to be clear, this position is a pre-existing position. It existed
It's
previously.
not. It's
It's not.
it's
Okay, it's nothing
technically
they
an
created.
invention of the White House. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So give us the I always turn to you for this, but give us the nightmare scenario here. Like what
Yeah.
could be done? What's
Uh,
this person's name also? Remind
yeah.
everyone.
Heather Honey. And I wrote a little bit about this on my Substack. If people go to treason.io, treason.substack.com, I wrote a little bit about this case. ProPublica and the Philadelphia Inquirer both had the initial reports on this. Is the department had quietly announced on its website that this woman had been named the head of election integrity at DHS. Again, a position that really hadn't existed before. What was interesting about this for Homeland Security watchers and election watchers is this is kind of a bureaucratic signal that the administration wants to put someone in charge of pulling the different strings within the department that are related to elections. Okay, so what does that look like? What does DHS do when it comes to federal elections? Well, as you rightfully note, Ryan, the Constitution makes sure that elections are state run and not federally run. However, the Department of Homeland Security provides millions and millions of dollars across the country to states and localities to help them secure their elections. The department provides cyber security support to election networks. In fact, dramatically ramped that up after 2016 with Russian attempts to probe U.S. networks. The Department of Homeland Security provides intelligence and analysis to those districts. It provides massive public outreach to alert people about voter suppression efforts, to swat down disinformation, and it engages in a whole array of efforts to help provide physical security across the country in areas where there might be threats, including around election time. And so, again, one of the department's core missions is the protection of federal buildings. And so that's a key element. Now, I sketched those out because it doesn't take much of a leap in imagination, Ryan, to think about how someone could misuse those powers for the nightmare scenario that you mentioned. And in this case, if Donald Trump wanted to start using the department to influence the 26th election, which would not be a surprise given what they're doing to gerrymander the 26th election in the president's favor, then that would likely mean going out there and using those organs of DHS instead of to swat down conspiracy theories to promote them or to try to create voter suppression in areas where they don't want to see the vote or in places that have been gerrymandered to, try and sow a little bit of chaos or to create even in places that don't have, voter ID mandates to effectively create the sense that there might be mandates. And I'll give you a more concrete example of that. Is look, voter ID is something that Donald Trump has talked about for a very long time. What's to prevent DHS from going to, let's use Chicago again, going to Chicago and blasting out the message from DHS? You should be sure to show up at the polls with your driver's license and passport is not required by the federal government. And maybe they would say, hey, we're just saying that as a precaution, so folks can validate their information or in case they get stopped on the way. But that in and of itself could be a voter suppression technique. Who's got their driver's license and passport handy with them, right? You might see someone in
Right.
Chicago say, I don't have those. I'm just not going to go vote today. It sounds too onerous. Or maybe there's new
Yeah.
restrictions. I mean, there's a lot of really messy things that could start to happen if they try to turn these levers of election security really towards the president's favor.
Wow, well, that's all that rather chilling, especially, knowing that some of these same cities could continue to have, federal agents, National Guard, and, in the case of LA, even US military, um, on the streets that could, be there for, in an ideal world, innocent purposes, but in an election environment, could be a tool of suppression, scaring people, and preventing people from getting to the polls in some of these, blue cities. Do
Well,
you see
we
do
saw
you
that.
sh do you share that concern?
Yeah, we saw that a little bit, Ryan, with in the past two election cycles with militia groups that were aligned with Trump's movement, and a lot of different militia groups in the lead up to the elections had pushed for these voter polling place patrols, and those patrols were ostensibly to provide security around polling places, but in reality they were meant to intimidate voters. And that's why a number of federal judges struck down those efforts and told those militia groups, no, you must stand whatever it is 100 yards away from there. We're not going to have you patrolling. Um, in 2026, I think it's very, very plausible, if not likely, that the administration undertakes nationwide deployments of federal law enforcement officers and potentially National Guard to polling places for exactly that purpose. And just wait, they're going to start to talk about how crime in the cities, especially Democrat cities, could endanger the right to vote. And they're just out there protecting the right to vote when instead it would send a very, very scary signal to folks to have, armed troops on their streets on the day that they're supposed to be going to vote. And the other piece here is, I mentioned the cybersecurity piece. Look, by the time we got to the 2020 election, according to my former colleague, Chris Krebs, who was running election security for the federal government through CISA, of course, he was famously fired by tweet by Donald Trump for saying that the 2020 election was secure. But in that election, something like 95% of voting precincts in America had their cyber networks protected basically on overwatch by DHS, monitoring for intrusions. Now, that's a good thing when we're talking about preventing foreign adversaries from coming in. That could be a very bad thing if you've got a Trump administration that wants to sow claims of, let's say, cyber meddling that may or may not exist in a certain district just to create chaos and uncertainty after the election. So again, if 26 doesn't go the way that Trump wants, you could see some weird, weird things happen in terms of use of DHS authorities.
All right. So, given that some of these states that might be the targets of this kind of thing do be aware that this is a possibility, and this might be beyond your area of expertise. What do you do if you are the mayor of Chicago or Governor Pritzker or Newsom? I'm mentioning Democratic mayors and governors because I've seen zero evidence that there are any Republicans who worry about this stuff or care. What can they do to make sure that their elections are run smoothly, that they don't cause panic, and prevent this kind of federal meddling? Anything?
Well, I honestly think one of the most important things that states can do is start talking to other states, because what could get really unusual here is if DHS starts to meddle in one place and the other place doesn't know about it. And so there may be sort of an early indicator here of whether the Trump administration is engaging in nefarious conduct when it comes to the 2026 election, just by virtue of those local networks. And in most states, the top election official is the Secretary of State in that location. And fortunately, a lot of the secretaries of state across this country are very well networked and they're sharing information. Unfortunately, I think a lot of them would say they've come to be quite dependent on DHS to provide insight on threats and misinformation, and to provide support to bolster election integrity. And now a lot of them have grown very, very wary of this department, and for exactly the reason that we are seeing. Trump is appointing people who those same secretaries of state had to fight out in the public domain to swat down conspiracy theories. He's appointing those types of people to now go run those services. And so, this very much is an example of like the fox going into the hen house here. And so when I talk to secretaries of state around the country and former secretaries of state, that's what they say is they're very worried. They don't know if they're going to be able to trust the federal government going into the elections. That's a very peculiar thing to say out loud. Is I'm not sure I can think of any period in the modern era where we've said state officials don't think they can trust the federal government's help and support during elections. Um, even when it's your state's a blue state and the White House has got a Republican, or when it's flip flopped, usually on issues like protecting the elections, it's a bipartisan concern. You don't see that sort of fear and distrust, but there is a great deal of that right now. And I think it's going to be important for those state leaders to stay well networked and coordinated, including their attorneys general, if things need to be taken to the courts in the lead up to 2026.
Yeah, and look, as we saw in the 2000 election, um, the infrastructure in the states can seem a little rickety when you start to look at it up close. And that's probably the last time I can remember sort of the kind of distrust that you were talking about when the Florida Secretary of State was not very well trusted under Jeb Bush, was not totally trusted by Democrats. But we solved that election, with a constitutionally. But Al Gore didn't like it, and the Supreme Court, not their finest moment in my view, not a great opinion in Gore v. Bush or Bush v. Gore.
But
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 we
what's
got
interesting
through it.
about that what's interesting about that though is that of course was a discrete case in controversy, a very big one. Um, but in the lead up to it, we had no indications that the state of Florida didn't trust the federal government. It wasn't until it was clear whatever was done was going to impact who won the election that things started to break down. Now here we
Oh, I mean,
are.
that will look like, I mean, at the time, I covered that very closely. I was down in Florida the entire time covering that, one of the great stories of politics in the last few decades. But now that will look like a tiny, um, a tiny little skirmish in our politics compared to January 6th and 2020. And if anything close to what you're describing comes to pass, and unfortunately, you've been very prescient about Trump, this would be, it would, uh, can't, I don't want to exaggerate and say it's the end of democracy, but you're talking about one party getting into power and basically overthrowing our democracy, overthrowing a fair and free election. I mean, the kind of thing that would have been unthinkable in the United States, at least before 2020.
Well, that's right. And I will say I had a good conversation earlier today with another person from that era when you were coming into politics, Ryan. Our friend Joe Klein, author of Primary Colors, former Time magazine columnist, and was talking to Joe Klein earlier today. And look, the one place where I disagreed with Joe um, early in our conversation was, you know, in his view, there's been too much hyperbole on the anti-Trump side about what this guy, Donald Trump, might do to our democracy. And that we're so early, it's tough to tell if his dictatorial inklings are just inklings or if he's going to make them real. That's a place I disagree with Joe. I respect him immensely, but I think Trump's inklings are becoming real. He's pursuing them. And that if we let down our guard, we're going to be really surprised by some of these things. So on the elections, for instance, this is one area where I think it's crucially important for experts to go do some wargaming. And some of this happened in the lead up to the Trump presidency, trying to anticipate the policies that he would implement. And even those war games underestimated how quickly this administration would move. Looking at 26, it's really, really important that experts that know Homeland Security and election security and democracy protection and lawyers, regardless of their political stripes, sit down and say, let's imagine these federal tools being misused to either influence the election in the president or his party's favor, or to frustrate the transfer of power after the 2026 election. If new members of Congress are elected and are supposed to be seated, what could that look like? And to game out those scenarios and to anticipate what might need to be done to protect democracy. This would again sound outlandish for us to have this conversation were it not for the fact that we had a very concerted high level attempt in 2020 for the first time in American history to prevent the transfer of power after the president lost the election. That same man is now back in government. I don't think we should assume he's not going to try to use those levers of power again to influence an election.
I don't know what else anyone needs to know except that he tried to overthrow the last election he lost, fomented a riot, came back into power, pardoned everyone who was convicted after the riot, and is now installing some of these people in high government places. I mean, you don't have to know anything else about all the other crazy shit that Trump has done this year, except for that, to be as concerned as you are. So I disagree with Joe on this as well. I don't think I don't think his level of alarm is not as high as it should be. Um, and um, Trump doesn't hide this stuff. It's all out in the open. There's no election. You go back to the Iowa caucuses, go back to the any of the primaries he was in. Every election he has been involved with, he first sets the stage for the possibility that if he loses, that the election itself was fraudulent. And then if he does indeed lose, he does everything he can to convince the public that it was fraudulent, up to and including what he did on January 6th, which is foment a violent ransacking of the Capitol to try and overturn the election. And sometimes I think people forget sort of some of these basics about who Trump is and his history and record because there's just this, I guess it's myopia, but also this sort of special journalistic myopia that I see in a lot of my colleagues, which is just, well, this is the elected, this is the president, and you can't constantly be hearkening back to stuff that happened years ago. There's this sort of presentism that takes hold, and to use a word that I know we're all sick of, this sort of normalization that you just start covering the person as if these things didn't happen. And I think the people who are rightly concerned keep these things front of mind all the time because they're, 100x more important than, some random thing he did at the White House that makes him seem momentarily like a traditional president. And let's be honest, even those moments are few and far between. But I do think this is like a deeper problem with the media in that these kind of like first principles about who Trump is just get forgotten.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would add to that, Ryan, a lot of those same people you and I know in the media who have, even if it's not a personal impulse, they have sort of a corporate mandate to start covering the present moment in that way you describe as, well, there's been a reset button. The people put Trump back into office. Let's cover
Exactly.
this like it's the start of, a second Bill Clinton term, when this is a very, very different world that we are living in. But those same people, if Donald Trump tries to thwart the 2026 election, will be clutching their pearls and reporting it breathlessly as it happens, as if no one could have expected it. And I'll point them back to whatever today is, August 29th, 2025, and say, Ryan and I were sitting there and having this conversation. This was very, very foreseeable, and experts were saying it was foreseeable. So why not make the American people aware of it? And that goes to your very first question at the beginning of this. That's where I think new media has an important role in this environment. I mean, I will say that personally, I've made the decision for a while there, for a few years. I went back to the work that I was doing, national security and technology policy, advising emerging tech companies. For the next 3.5 years, at least, I am solely focused on ending presidential revenge, whether that's shining a light on the Trump revenge campaign through new media, whether that's making sure that the people who get unfairly caught in the crosshairs of this get the legal defense and support they need, or just being out there to go provide moral support to the vast array of folks that are being targeted by unlawful and unconstitutional actions. And if Donald Trump was a Democrat, I'd be doing the same thing. It's not about the fact that I defected from my former party. It's about that what we are witnessing right now is historic lawlessness that threatens our democracy. And I think new media is uniquely positioned to cover it at the speed at which it's happening.
I agree with you, and I know how you doing on time? You gotta get going, Miles, right?
I do. I've got to jump here, but
Last thing I
yeah.
wanna say is I agree, and I just think, I said this when I started on Substack is, for me, there's a lot of great journalists in the mainstream media, but the gap between what everyone knows is happening and what they're witnessing on a daily basis and how it gets reported in our kind of corporate, whitewashed environment has just become so wide as to make a good chunk of the coverage just um, not the truth, just not accurate because you have so many journalists writing with sort of, one hand tied behind their back in a sense. And the leverage that the Trump administration is using over these huge corporations just reinforces uh, that instinct. And I don't think it's too much to say that there's a crisis right now in corporate media and how it covers the Trump administration. It's not going to get better. These institutions have had a decade to figure this out, and unfortunately, for the most part, I hate saying everyone, but they haven't. And this will lead me to a shameless plug, which I hate doing, but I realize is important. If you have not become a paid subscriber to Miles's Substack, please do so. Support the work he's doing. If you haven't become a paid subscriber to my Substack, greatly appreciate it. It helps. Everything I put out there is free, and I make my living doing this. So please chip in and subscribe if you can. And Miles, I know you got to jump off. You had a final word you wanted to say, though.
Well, look, I would just foot stomp that, and it's not like Substack corporate overlords are asking us to say these things, right? Ryan and I aren't under any obligation to say that. But really, I think even a year from now, we're on the cusp of a new media explosion. I mean, we're seeing a lot of it. I still think it's just the very beginning. I mean, every day folks are seeing named journalists that they trust leaving the major institutions and going into independent media. And there's a reason for that. And a lot of them are really concerned concerned about what they're seeing at the networks and feel like if it's not already here, that censorship is on the way. And you don't have to look farther than what happened at Paramount for that. You don't have to look farther than what's happened at NBC of them, kicking MSNBC out of their ecosystem. There's a lot of corporate fear about upsetting Donald Trump and the Trump administration. And the great journalists of our time, Ryan included, Ryan especially, have gone into the new media ecosystem to make sure people really get the truth unvarnished. And I'm just grateful for the fact that you made that decision, my friend, and that you're out here. So always wonderful to be on with you.
Yeah, Sam, I love it. I wish I had done this years ago. Even if I wasn't making a penny, I would be doing this. And I consider it, the most important work I've done in my career. And Tellus is about to, after Labor Day, to ramp up substantially. So we got some cool stuff coming in the fall. Miles, we'll do this again. We'll do this regularly, I hope. I could listen to you all day. Thank you for your expertise and your insights, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you,
All right,
friends.
thanks everyone.